dear lovers of ancient tales. Welcome, fellow wanderers, through the misty corridors of Greek mythology, and welcome to all who seek the gentle embrace of stories told beneath starlit skies. Before we begin, if you enjoy these quiet journeys through ancient myth, feel free to subscribe to Greek Myths for Sleep and leave a gentle, like it helps this story reach others who need rest, just like you. In the time before time was counted by mortal hands, when the world was young and the gods walked more freely between the heavens and the earth, there existed a golden age where humanity knew neither sorrow nor toil, neither sickness nor the weight of years that bent backs and silvered hair. The air itself seemed sweeter then, carrying the perpetual fragrance of spring blossoms and ripening fruit, while gentle rains fell only when the earth grew thirsty, and the sun's warmth never scorched, but only caressed the skin like a mother's tender touch. Mount Olympus rose above the clouds in those days, as it does now, though perhaps it gleamed more brightly then, its peaks wrapped in ribbons of light that shifted from gold to silver to rose as the hours passed in their eternal dance. Within the great halls of the gods, where pillars of marble stretched toward ceilings painted with living constellations, Zeus sat upon his throne, contemplating the world below. His eyes, storm gray and ancient beyond mortal comprehension, watched as humanity lived in their blessed simplicity, knowing neither the sharp edge of ambition nor the hollow ache of loss. Yet there had been discord among the immortals, a ripple in the usually placid waters of divine harmony. Prometheus, the Titan whose name meant forethought, had dared to steal fire from the sacred hearth of Olympus, carrying it down to humanity, hidden within the hollow of a fennel stalk. The flames had flickered and danced as he descended through the layers of sky, past the realm where eagles soared, past the domain of clouds, until his feet touched the earth, where mortals dwelt in their gentle ignorance. With that single spark, he had given them the power to push back the darkness, to warm their homes, to forge tools and weapons, to begin the long journey from simplicity toward something more complex, more dangerous, more divine. Zeus had discovered this theft, as Zeus discovered all things in time, and his anger had been terrible to behold, though we shall speak of it softly here, as one speaks of distant thunder that rumbles beyond mountains. Prometheus was bound, sentenced to an eternity of suffering upon a lonely crag, though that is a tale for another night. But Zeus' anger extended beyond the Titan who had defied him. He looked down at humanity, now gathering around their new fires, their faces illuminated by the dancing flames, their eyes bright with a new kind of knowledge, and he knew that this gift could not be taken back. What was given was given. What was known could not be unknown. So Zeus conceived of a different plan, one that would unfold like a flower blooming in reverse, beautiful to behold, yet carrying within its petals something darker, something that would balance the scales of divine justice. He summoned Hephaestus, the smith god, whose forge lay deep within the mountain, where the heat of the earth's heart could be felt through the soles of one's feet, and the ring of hammer on anvil echoed through caverns of crystal and stone. Hephaestus came, limping slightly as was his way, his massive hands stained with the work of creation, his beard singed from the proximity to eternal flames. Zeus spoke to him in the language of gods, which mortals cannot fully comprehend. sounds that were like wind through mountains, and waves upon shores, and the deep groaning of the earth when it shifts in its sleep. The command was simple yet complex. Create a being of such beauty that even the gods would pause to admire, fashion from clay and water something that had never before existed. A woman who would be the first of her kind, perfect in form, yet carrying within her nature the seeds of humanity's education in the ways of suffering. The forge god nodded his great head and returned to his workshop, where rivers of molten metal flowed in channels carved through solid rock, where the very air shimmered with heat mirages that showed glimpses of things that might be, or had been, or never were at all. He gathered the finest clay, not the common earth that mortals might use for their simple pots, but clay from the sacred grove where the first plants had grown, clay that remembered the formation of the world itself. He mixed it with water drawn from the spring of the Muses, water that carried within it the essence of inspiration and art, of music and poetry, of all things that lifted the spirit above the mundane. With hands that had shaped the thrones of gods and the chains that bound, Titans, Hephaestus began to work. He molded and shaped, smoothed and refined, his fingers moving with the precision of one who had crafted the very gates of Olympus. The figure that emerged was indeed beautiful, though beauty is too simple a word for what he created. She was harmony given form, proportion made manifest, the golden ratio expressed in flesh that was not yet flesh, in eyes that did not yet see, in lips that had not yet drawn breath. When the form was complete, Hephaestus stepped back, wiping his brow with a forearm massive as a tree trunk, and called upon the other gods to come and witness, to contribute their gifts to this new creation. They came drifting through the workshop like dreams taking shape, each divinity bringing something of their own nature to bestow upon the clay figure that stood so still and perfect in the orange light of the forge. Athena came first, her gray eyes thoughtful, her movements deliberate and graceful. She had woven a garment of the finest thread spun from clouds and dyed with the colors of dawn, a peplos that seemed to shift and change depending on the angle of view, sometimes appearing silver as moonlight, sometimes golden as wheat fields, sometimes the deep purple of wine-dark seas. She dressed the clay figure with careful hands, adjusting each fold until it fell perfectly, and as she worked, she breathed into the figure the gifts of craft and cleverness, of nimble fingers that could weave and sew, embroider and create. She gave her the knowledge of domestic arts, the understanding of how to manage a household, how to spin thread from wool, how to transform raw materials into things of beauty and utility. Aphrodite approached next, gliding rather than walking, her presence filling the workshop with the scent of roses and myrrh, jasmine and honey. Where her feet touched the ground, small flowers bloomed and withered in the space of a heartbeat, the very stones seeming to sigh with longing. She circled the clay figure slowly, consideringly, her perfect fingers trailing through the air as if painting invisible improvements. With a touch to the figure's cheeks, she brought a bloom of color that would never fade, the perpetual blush of youth and health. She shaped the lips into a curve that suggested secrets and promises, made the eyes large and luminous, fringed with lashes like dark silk. Into the very essence of the figure, she poured grace and charm, the ability to move in ways that would catch the eye and hold it, the power to inspire desire and devotion, love and longing. She gave her a voice that would be like music, like water over stones, like wind through leaves, a voice that could soothe or excite, comfort or disturb. Apollo came bearing gifts of musical talent, placing within her throat the ability to sing songs that could move the hardest heart, melodies that would be remembered long after the singer had passed from sight. He touched her ears and gave them the ability to discern harmony from discord, rhythm from chaos, the mathematical precision that underlies all beauty. Hermes, Quicksilver messenger, god of boundaries and travelers, of thieves and merchants, approached with his characteristic grin, his winged sandals barely touching the forge floor. His gift was more complex, more double-edged than the others. He gave her persuasion, the ability to shape words into keys that could unlock the doors of minds and hearts. But with this gift came also cunning, the capacity for deception, the knowledge of how to say one thing while meaning another, how to smile while harboring different intentions, how to weave truth and falsehood into patterns so intricate that even she herself might not always know where one ended and the other began. He gave her curiosity too, that restless quality that would not let mysteries remain unexplored, questions remain unasked, boxes remain unopened. The Graces came as a trio, moving in perfect synchronization, their faces identical yet somehow distinct. Like the same melody played in different keys, they danced around the figure, their feet creating patterns on the workshop floor that seemed to glow faintly before fading. And as they danced, they bestowed upon her charm and beauty of movement, the ability to make even simple gestures seem like poetry, to turn walking into dancing, to make stillness itself a kind of performance. Each god and goddess who came brought something, even those whose gifts might seem less benign. From the darker corners of the workshop, where shadows gathered like living things, came contributions that would make this creation fully rounded, fully real, fully dangerous. For Zeus had not commanded that she be made only beautiful and accomplished, but that she be made complete, carrying within her nature all the complexities that would make her truly the mother of mortal women. When all the gifts had been given, when the clay figure stood adorned and enhanced, perfected and complicated, Zeus himself approached. The king of gods moved with the slow inevitability of storm clouds gathering, his presence making the very air feel heavy with potential, like the moment before lightning strikes. He carried with him a small jar, though jar is perhaps not the right word for this object. It was a pythos, a great ceramic vessel that despite its size seemed to weigh nothing in Zeus's hands, its surface decorated with scenes that shifted and changed when one tried to focus on them, showing sometimes faces twisted in anguish, sometimes hands reaching toward sky, sometimes shapes that the mind refused to fully comprehend or remember. But we move ahead of ourselves in the telling. First, Zeus breathed life into the clay figure, and this was perhaps the most wondrous and terrible moment of all. The breath of Zeus was not like mortal breath, not merely air moving in and out of lungs. It was the breath that had first stirred the waters of chaos, the breath that had given motion to the stars, the breath that carried within it the essence of existence itself. As it entered the clay figure, transformation rippled through her like waves, spreading from a stone dropped in still water. The clay softened and became flesh, warm and supple, with blood beginning to flow through vessels that formed even as the divine breath created them, the eyes, which had been beautifully crafted but empty, suddenly filled with light, with awareness, with that spark that separates the living from the merely formed. Her chest rose and fell in its first independent breath, drawing in the smoky air of the forge, tasting for the first time the complex flavors of existence. Her fingers flexed, exploring their own ability to move, to touch, to feel the texture of the magnificent garment that clothed her. She blinked, those long-lashed eyes focusing first on Zeus, then on the assembled divinities who watched her with expressions ranging from satisfaction to concern to something that might have been pity, though gods feel emotions differently than mortals, and what seems like pity might be something else entirely, something for which human language has no proper word. Zeus named her Pandora, which means all gifted, for she had received something from each of the immortals, making her a collection of divine attributes wrapped in mortal form. But the name carried other meanings too, layers of significance that would only become clear with time, for she was also the all-giving one, though what she would give to humanity was yet to be revealed. The preparation of Pandora for her descent to the mortal world was elaborate and careful, like the preparation of a bride for her wedding day, though this comparison carries its own bitter irony that the gods surely appreciated. Athena taught her to walk with dignity, to hold her head at just the right angle to display both modesty and confidence. Aphrodite instructed her in the arts of adornment, how to arrange her hair so that it would catch the light, how to move so that her garments would flow gracefully around her, how to smile in ways that could mean different things to different observers. The Horae, the goddesses of the seasons, came to prepare her for her journey. Spring crowned her with fresh flowers that would not wilt. Summer warmed her skin to a golden glow. Autumn placed fruits of the harvest in her hands, and winter gave her a cloak that would protect her from all weather, yet appear light as gossamer. They sang as they worked, their voices harmonizing in ways that made the very stones of Olympus resonate in sympathy. Songs about time and change, about cycles that must complete themselves, about endings that were also beginnings. When all was ready, Hermes was chosen to escort Pandora to the mortal realm, specifically to the dwelling of Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, the brother of that same Prometheus who now suffered for his theft of fire. This choice was not random, not merely convenient, but part of the great pattern that Zeus had conceived, a pattern as intricate as the designs on that mysterious jar that Pandora now carried with her, held carefully in her slender arms, as if it were a wedding gift or a treasure beyond price. The jar itself deserves our contemplation, for it was no ordinary vessel, even by the standards of divine craftsmanship. Its surface seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating an effect where it appeared to be made of solid shadow given form. Yet when touched, it felt warm, almost alive, with a subtle vibration that might have been imagination, or might have been the stirring of its contents. Zeus had sealed it with knots that no mortal could recognize, let alone untie, knots that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could perceive, knots that were also words of power, binding spells that should have been unbreakable. Inside the jar, Zeus had placed all the sorrows and troubles that had been kept from humanity during their golden age of innocence. Disease waited there in the darkness, coiled like serpents made of fever and pain. Old age crouched in the depths, patient as stone, knowing its time would come. Madness giggled quietly to itself, a sound like broken glass grinding together. Envy and greed pressed against the sides of the jar, trying to find weakness in the ceramic walls. War beat its drums in a rhythm that made the jar throb like a dark heart. Famine scraped its empty bowl with skeletal fingers. 1,000 other miseries, great and small, swirled together in that confined space, each one eager to escape, to spread across the world like ink spilled across clean parchment. But at the very bottom of the jar, placed there by some power that even Zeus might not have fully controlled or understood, lay one final thing. It was smaller than the rest, quieter, easily overlooked among the clamoring disasters. It was hope, though hope is perhaps too simple a word for what it truly was. It was the capacity to continue despite suffering, the ability to see light even in darkness, the strange human talent for believing that tomorrow might be better than today, even when all evidence suggests otherwise. It glowed softly in the darkness of the jar, a warm golden light like a candle flame that refuses to be extinguished no matter how strong the wind. The journey from Olympus to the dwelling of Epimetheus was like a dream of flying, or perhaps like those moments between sleep and waking when one seems to drift through layers of reality without quite belonging to any of them. Hermes carried Pandora through the sky, his winged sandals beating air that grew thicker and more substantial as they descended from the divine realm toward the mortal world. She watched the earth grow larger beneath them, seeing first the whole of the land spread out like a map drawn by gods, then gradually making out individual features, mountain ranges, like the spines of sleeping dragons, rivers, like silver threads weaving through green fabric, forests that moved in the wind, like living creatures breathing in their sleep. The dwelling of Epimetheus was modest by divine standards, but pleasant by mortal ones. A house of white stone with a roof of red clay tiles, surrounded by olive groves and gardens, where vegetables grew in neat rows. Smoke rose from the chimney, the smoke of that stolen fire that had started all of this. And somewhere within, Epimetheus worked at some humble task, unaware that his life was about to change, in ways that would echo through all of human history. Hermes alighted in the garden as gently as a leaf falling, setting Pandora down among the herbs and flowers. The plants seemed to lean toward her, as if recognizing something divine in her nature, and butterflies came to dance around her head, like living ornaments. Hermes spoke to her then, his usually laughing voice serious for once, giving her final instructions that were also warnings, though wrapped in the ambiguity that gods prefer when speaking of fate and destiny. He told her she was to be the wife of Epimetheus, that she should be dutiful and loving, that she should manage his household and bear children who would populate the earth. But about the jar, he said only that it was her dowry, a gift from the gods that she should guard carefully. He did not say she should never open it, for that would have been too direct, too clear, and the gods rarely speak so plainly. Instead, he spoke in riddles and metaphors, in hints and suggestions, knowing perhaps that the curiosity he himself had given her would eventually overcome any warnings, no matter how clearly stated. When Hermes departed, rising into the sky like smoke dispersing, becoming smaller and smaller until he was just another bird among the clouds, then nothing at all, Pandora stood alone in the garden for a moment that stretched like years. She could hear sounds from within the house, the ordinary sounds of mortal life, footsteps on stone floors, the crackle of fire in the hearth, the splash of water being poured from jug to cup. Such simple sounds, yet they seemed to her divine trained ears to contain whole symphonies of meaning, patterns of existence that gods observed but never truly experienced. She walked into the door, each step feeling momentous, as if the earth itself held its breath to see what would come next. When she knocked, the sound seemed to echo not just through the house, but through time itself, forward and backward, a knock that would be remembered in stories told around fires for thousands of years to come. The door opened, and there stood Epimetheus, Afterthought, the one who understood things only after they had happened, whose wisdom came always a moment too late to prevent disaster, but just in time to understand it. He was not handsome as gods are handsome, with that terrible perfection that makes mortals avert their eyes. Instead, he had the beauty of mortality itself, eyes that showed uncertainty and wonder, skin marked by sun and wind, hands calloused from work, a face that could express the full range of human emotion without the mask-like control of divinity. When he saw Pandora, his expression went through a transformation that was like watching the sky change from night to day in the space of a heartbeat. Surprise became wonder, wonder became desire, desire became something softer, more dangerous, more lasting. Prometheus had warned his brother about gifts from the gods, had sent messages even from his place of torment on the distant crag, messages carried by winds and interpreted by priests, messages that said to accept nothing from Zeus, to trust no beauty that came unasked for, to remember that gods give nothing without expecting something in return. But Epimetheus, true to his nature, forgot all warnings the moment he saw Pandora. Or perhaps he remembered them but chose to ignore them, for sometimes the heart makes decisions that the mind knows are foolish, and sometimes those foolish decisions lead to the most important moments in the long story of the world. He invited her in, and she entered his house as naturally as if she had always belonged there, as if the threshold had been waiting for her foot to cross it, as if the hearth had been lit specifically to welcome her. She set the jar down carefully in a corner, in shadows where its dark surface seemed to merge with the darkness, becoming almost invisible, almost forgotten, almost. The courtship, if it could be called that, was brief and inevitable. How could Epimetheus resist her when she had been crafted specifically to be irresistible? When she sang, her voice trained by Apollo filled the house with melodies that made the walls themselves seem to listen. When she wove at the loom Athena's gift had taught her to use, patterns emerged that told stories without words, images that captured moments of beauty so perfectly that to look at them was to feel one's heart simultaneously lifted and broken. When she moved through the garden, Aphrodite's grace made her seem less like she was walking and more like she was participating in some cosmic dance, to music only she could hear. They were married, as mortals marry, with witnesses from the village coming to feast and celebrate, to drink wine and dance until the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal patterns. The people who came did not know they were witnessing the beginning of the end of their golden age, that the bride they toasted with cups raised high was carrying their doom in the jar that sat so quietly in the corner, covered now with a cloth to make it less conspicuous, though its presence seemed to create a kind of gravity that drew the eye despite all attempts at concealment. The wedding night passed in the way of all wedding nights, with joy and discovery, with the joining of two who become one, though in this case one was mortal and one was something else, something crafted by gods for purposes that had nothing to do with love. Yet perhaps love grew anyway, as flowers sometimes grow in the cracks of stones, finding nourishment in the most unlikely places. Epimetheus was gentle and kind, qualities not given by gods, but arising from his own mortal nature. And Pandora, despite her divine construction, found herself responding to this gentleness with something that felt genuine, though she could not be certain what was real and what was part of her design. Days passed in domestic harmony, each one like a bead on a string, similar, yet unique. Pandora learned the rhythms of mortal life, so different from the eternal present of Olympus where time moved differently or perhaps did not move at all. She learned about hunger and how it was satisfied by bread and oil, wine and honey. She learned about fatigue and how it was cured by sleep, that strange mortal custom of spending hours in unconsciousness, visited by dreams that might be messages from gods or might be nothing more than the mind talking to itself in symbols and stories. She learned about the satisfaction of work completed, bread baked, water drawn from the well, floors swept clean, garments mended with tiny, careful stitches. But always, there was the jar. It sat in its corner like a dark sun, around which the life of the household secretly orbited. Pandora found herself walking past it more often than necessary, her fingers sometimes reaching out to almost touch its surface before pulling back as if burned. At night, when Epimetheus slept beside her, his breath deep and even, she would lie awake listening to the house settling, the walls creaking as they cooled, the wind exploring the spaces under doors and around windows. And sometimes she thought she could hear something from the jar, not exactly sounds, but the suggestion of sounds, the possibility of voices, like a conversation happening in a distant room where only the rhythm of speech carries, but not the words themselves. She began to make excuses to be alone in the room with the jar. She would send Epimetheus on errands to the village, would suggest he visit neighbors, would encourage him to work in the furthest fields. When he was gone, she would sit near the jar, not touching it, just observing, as if by looking at it long enough she might develop the ability to see through its dark surface to what lay within. She invented stories about its contents. Perhaps it held wedding gifts from the gods, treasures beyond mortal imagination. Perhaps it contained secrets of the universe, knowledge that would make mortals equal to gods. Perhaps it was full of nothing more than air, and the gods were playing an elaborate joke, testing mortal restraint for their own amusement. The curiosity Hermes had given her was like an itch that could not be scratched, a thirst that water could not quench, a question that demanded an answer even if the answer might be terrible. It grew stronger with each passing day, fed by every moment of not knowing, until it became the dominant feature of her existence, overshadowing all the gifts the other gods had given her. She found herself unable to concentrate on her weaving, the patterns becoming confused, threads tangling. Her singing became distracted, notes falling in the wrong places, melodies trailing off into silence. Even her beauty seemed affected, a line of worry appearing between her brows, her smiles becoming forced and brief. Epimetheus noticed the change, but, true to his nature, did not understand its cause until it was too late to prevent what was coming. He attributed her distraction to homesickness, though when asked where her home was, Pandora could not say, having no home before his house, no existence before her creation in the forge of Hephaestus. He tried to cheer her with small gifts, flowers from the meadow, pretty stones from the stream, a young rabbit he had rescued from a hawk, thinking it might serve as a pet and companion. She accepted these gifts with gratitude that was genuine but fleeting, her attention always returning to the corner where the jar waited with the patience of inevitability. The day came, as Zeus had known it would, as perhaps all the gods had known it would, when the curiosity became unbearable. It was an ordinary day in all other respects. The sun rose as it always did, painting the sky first gray, then pink, then blue. Birds sang their morning songs. The breeze carried the scent of wild thyme and oregano from the hillsides. Epimetheus had gone to help a neighbor repair a wall damaged by winter rains, work that would keep him away until sunset. Pandora had bread to bake, water to fetch, 1,000 small tasks that made up the rhythm of mortal life. But she did none of them. Instead, she stood before the jar, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat, in her wrists, in the soles of her feet where they pressed against the cool stone floor. Her hands shook as she reached for the cloth that covered it, pulling it away, with a movement that seemed both too fast and too slow, like something happening in a dream where time moves according to different rules. The jar stood revealed in the morning light that came through the window, and for the first time, she could see the scenes carved or painted, or somehow inscribed upon its surface clearly. They were scenes of the world as it was, peaceful, harmonious, blessed. Mortals worked in fields where crops never failed, walked in forests where no dangerous beasts lurked, sailed seas that never stirred to storms. They aged slowly and died peacefully, slipping from life into death as easily as slipping from wakefulness into sleep. There was no war, for what was there to fight about when all had enough? There was no disease, for bodies were strong and whole, untouched by the invisible enemies that would soon be released. There was no madness, for minds were clear and calm as still water, untroubled by the demons that waited in the dark interior of the jar. The seals that Zeus had placed on the jar were complex beyond mortal understanding, but Pandora was not entirely mortal. The divine gifts she had received included knowledge she did not know she possessed, abilities that surfaced only when needed. Her fingers found the beginning of the first knot, as if guided by memory of something never experienced. The binding resisted at first, then seemed to yield, as if it too were curious about what would happen next. One by one, the seals came undone, each one releasing with a soft sound like a sigh, like a last breath, like the whisper of a name that would never be spoken again. When the final seal was released, there was a moment of perfect stillness, the kind of stillness that comes just before an avalanche, just before a wave breaks, just before everything changes forever. Pandora's hand rested on the lid of the jar, and she could feel it wanting to open, could feel the pressure from within, the eager push of contents too long confined. Part of her, some small voice that might have been wisdom, or might have been fear, screamed at her to stop, to reseal the jar, to walk away and never look back. But that voice was drowned out by the roar of curiosity, the need to know, that had been woven into her very essence by the gods who had made her for this moment, this action, this irreversible choice. She lifted the lid. What emerged first was not visible to the eye but felt in the soul, a coldness that had nothing to do with temperature, a darkness that had nothing to do with the absence of light. It poured from the jar like water from a broken dam, like smoke from a fire that burns things that should not be burned, like the breath of caves that have never known sunlight. The miseries that Zeus had confined came rushing out in a torrent that seemed endless. Though the jar itself was finite in size, they took shapes as they emerged, some recognizable, others abstract, all terrible in their own ways. Disease came first, a swirling cloud of yellow and green, the colors of infection and decay. It spread through the room like fog, seeping into corners, sliding under doors, finding every crack and crevice through which it could escape into the wider world. Where it passed, flowers wilted, food spoiled, and the very air seemed to thicken with the promise of fever and pain. Behind it came old age, moving slowly but inexorably, leaving trails of gray and silver, the colors of hair losing its pigment, of skin losing its elasticity, of bones becoming brittle as dried twigs. War burst from the jar, with the sound of bronze clashing against bronze, of arrows singing through air, of the terrible silence that follows a battlefield's last cry. It took the shape of a figure wrapped in dark crimson, faceless but somehow expressing rage and hatred in every movement. Famine followed, thin as a whisper, its ribs showing through translucent skin, its eyes hollow pits that reflected nothing but hunger, endless, gnawing hunger that could never be satisfied no matter how much was consumed. Madness came dancing, its movements erratic and disturbing, humming a tune that seemed to burrow into the mind and nest there, laying eggs of confusion and delusion that would hatch in their own time. Envy slithered out, green as poison, as bile, looking always at what others had, never satisfied with its own portion. Greed clutched at everything it passed, trying to grasp and hold and own, its fingers like claws that left scratches on everything they touched. Sorrow flowed like dark water, like tears that would never stop falling, like the rain that comes after drought, too much and too late. Hatred blazed like fire that consumes without warmth, destroys without purpose, leaves nothing but ash and the memory of what once was. Deceit came wearing 1,000 faces, each one sincere, each one false, changing so quickly that the eye could not follow, the mind could not grasp which if any was real. They poured out and out and out, more than should have been able to fit in any container, as if the jar had been bigger on the inside than the outside, as if it connected to some vast reservoir of suffering that had been waiting since the beginning of time for this moment of release. Each misery that emerged seemed to call to others, to multiply, to breed variations of itself. Disease split into countless forms. Plagues that killed quickly, ailments that lingered for years, infections that passed from person to person like terrible gifts, conditions that affected the mind as much as the body. Pandora stood frozen, the lid still in her hand, watching the horror she had unleashed. She wanted to move, to somehow recapture what had escaped, but her body would not obey. She was like someone watching their house burn, knowing they should run for water, but unable to look away from the flames. The miseries swirled around her, through her, some of them leaving their mark as they passed. She felt the first touch of age in a strand of her hair that turned gray, felt the first hint of disease in a cough that came from nowhere, felt the first whisper of madness in the way the room seemed to tilt and spin. Only when the stream of escaping evils began to slow did she find the strength to move. With effort that felt like pushing against a mountain, she forced the lid back toward the jar. But so much had already escaped, flowing out through windows and doors, spreading like ripples from a stone thrown into still water, racing across the world to find every mortal who had lived in blessed ignorance of such things. She could hear, with senses sharpened by divine gifts, the first cries of those touched by disease, the first wails of those experiencing loss, the first clash of weapons as neighbors who had lived in peace suddenly found reasons to fight. Yet, as she struggled to replace the lid, she saw something else in the jar, something that had not escaped with the rest. It was small, almost insignificant, compared to what had already emerged, glowing with a soft golden light, like a candle flame in a vast darkness. It was hope, and it looked up at her with what might have been eyes, or might have been stars, might have been a face, or might have been a feeling given form for a moment that stretched like eternity. Pandora and Hope regarded each other, and in that moment, a choice hung in the balance. She could release Hope too, let it follow its dark siblings into the world, or she could seal it in the jar, keep it confined, perhaps protect it, perhaps imprison it. The choice was hers, the first real choice she had ever made, not compelled by divine design or mortal expectation, but arising from some deep place within her that even the gods had not crafted. Her hand trembled as she held the lid poised above the jar, and Hope waited, patient as dawn that knows it will come, regardless of how long the night might seem. The stories that mortals tell say different things about what happened next. Some say she trapped Hope in the jar, keeping it from humanity, dooming them to face their sufferings without even the comfort of believing things might improve. Others say she released it at the last moment, that Hope flew out just as the lid came down, escaping by the narrowest margin to take its place in the world. Still others say that Hope chose to remain, that it could have escaped, but stayed behind for reasons of its own, reasons that mortals could not understand. But perhaps the truth is more complex, as truth often is. Perhaps Hope both stayed and went, both was trapped and freed, exists both in the jar and in the world, because Hope is not bound by the simple rules that govern other things. Perhaps every time someone opens their heart despite having been hurt, every time someone plants seeds despite the possibility of drought, every time someone loves despite the certainty of loss, they are releasing hope from its confinement, letting it out into the world, one small portion at a time, a controlled release that makes it more precious for being rare, more powerful for being chosen, rather than simply experienced. Pandora replaced the lid and fell to her knees beside the jar, her body shaking with the sobs that seemed to come from some deep well of sorrow that had not existed before this moment. She wept for what she had done, for what she had released, for the golden age that was ending even as she knelt there, its death rattles echoing across the world in the form of new sounds, the wheeze of diseased lungs, the crack of breaking bones, the clash of weapons, the wail of mourners, the babble of minds coming apart, the silence of those who had given up. When Epimetheus returned at sunset, he found her still there, curled around the jar as if protecting it or being protected by it, her face streaked with tears that had dried into salt trails on her perfect cheeks. He knew immediately what had happened, not because forethought had suddenly blessed him, but because the effects were already visible. Outside, he had passed a neighbor coughing with the first cold any mortal had ever experienced. He had seen children fighting over a toy that they had shared happily that very morning. He had felt in his own bones an ache that was new, the first hint of the aging that would now come to all mortals. But Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, who understood things only after they had occurred, had his moment of perfect clarity. He did not rage at Pandora, did not cast her out, did not even ask why she had opened the jar. Instead, he knelt beside her and gathered her into his arms, holding her as she shook with sobs that seemed too large for her frame to contain. He understood in that moment that she had been made for this, crafted as surely as the jar had been crafted, designed to be the instrument of humanity's education in suffering. She was not to blame any more than a sword is to blame for cutting or fire is to blame for burning. And in that embrace, in that moment of forgiveness given and received, something else was released into the world, something that had not been in the jar, but arose from the meeting of divine craft and mortal compassion. It was love, not the love that Aphrodite had designed, full of desire and jealousy and the potential for pain, but something quieter, deeper, more enduring. The love that sees clearly and accepts fully, that knows the worst and chooses to stay, that finds in shared suffering a bond stronger than shared joy could ever create. The world had changed forever. In villages and cities across the earth, mortals were learning what it meant to truly be mortal. They felt the first fevers, the first aches of age, the first grip of winter that now seemed cold in a way it never had before. They experienced the first deaths that came too soon, children taken by disease, adults felled by accidents that would have been survivable in the golden age, elderly, and now there were elderly, where before there had been only the eternally vital, slipping away in their sleep, leaving behind those who had to learn what mourning meant. But they also learned other things. They learned that suffering shared is suffering halved, that a cool cloth on a fevered brow is a form of prayer, that holding someone's hand while they face their fears is a kind of magic that even gods might envy. They learned that mortality makes every moment precious, that the fleeting nature of life gives it a sweetness that immortality can never know. They learned to value health because they had experienced sickness, to treasure peace because they had known war, to appreciate sanity because they had seen madness. Prometheus, bound to his rock, felt the change in the world like a shift in the wind. His daily torment continued. The eagle still came to tear at his liver, but now there was something different in the air, a quality of endurance that had not existed before. Mortals had his fire, and now they had something else, something that would allow them to use that fire not just for warmth and cooking, but for forging, creating, building. They had the knowledge of suffering, which is perhaps the beginning of wisdom. The gods watched from Olympus with expressions that mortal eyes could not have read. Zeus sat on his throne, satisfied that balance had been restored, that the scales of justice had been evened. But perhaps there was something else in his storm-gray eyes, a recognition that what had been released could never be recaptured, that the world had been changed in ways even he had not fully foreseen. The other gods who had contributed to Pandora's creation watched their gifts play out in the new world, saw how beauty could be used for deception, how craft could create weapons as easily as tools, how persuasion could lead to lies as easily as truth. Yet Athena, goddess of wisdom, perhaps smiled a small, secret smile. For in this new world of suffering and struggle, mortals would need wisdom more than ever. They would need to learn, to grow, to adapt, to become more than they had been in their innocent golden age. The introduction of evil had also introduced the possibility of choosing good. The existence of suffering had created the opportunity for compassion. The presence of death had given meaning to life. Pandora and Epimetheus continued to live together, and in time they had children, a daughter named Pyrrha, who would carry the story forward into the next stage of the world. They aged as all mortals now aged, feeling their bodies change with the passing years, watching their hair silver and their skin lined with the map of their experiences. But they also loved, with a deep, complex love that can only exist in a world where loss is possible, where every embrace might be the last, where every word might be a farewell. The jar remained in their house, sealed again, with hope still inside, or perhaps hope having escaped, or perhaps hope existing in some state that transcended inside and outside. Sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet and the stars looked down with their cold, eternal eyes, Pandora would sit beside it and listen. She could hear, or thought she could hear, hope moving within, not trying to escape, but simply existing, patient as seeds in winter soil, ready for the moment when it would be needed most. As the years passed, the story of Pandora's jar spread across the world, told and retold, each telling adding layers of meaning like pearl nacre accumulating around a grain of sand. Some blamed her for all the world's troubles, calling her curious and foolish, the author of humanity's fall from grace. Others saw her as a necessary actor in a divine drama, playing the role she was created to play, no more responsible for her actions than a river is responsible for flowing downhill. Still others recognized in her the fundamental human trait of needing to know, to understand, to explore, even when exploration might be dangerous, even when knowledge might bring pain. The jar became a symbol, a metaphor, a teaching tool. Parents would tell their children about it as a warning against curiosity, then wonder why they had taught their children to fear the very quality that drove them to learn, to grow, to become more than they were. Philosophers would debate whether it was better to have remained in ignorance and bliss, or to have gained knowledge and suffering. Poets would write verses about hope, that strange gift that might be the cruelest torture or the greatest mercy, depending on how one chose to see it. And through it all, through the generations that followed, mortals endured. They faced the evils that had been released, sometimes succumbing, sometimes triumphing, always struggling. They built medicines to fight disease, though new diseases would always arise. They created laws to prevent war, though conflicts would still erupt like volcanoes that seem dormant until they are not. They developed philosophies to combat despair, religions to make sense of suffering, art to transform pain into beauty. They also loved fiercely and tenderly, knowing that all love ends in loss. but choosing to love anyway. They created beauty, knowing it would fade, built cities, knowing they would crumble, wrote songs, knowing they would be forgotten. They did these things not in spite of mortality, but because of it, the shortened span of life, making every action more significant, every choice more meaningful, every moment more precious. In the evening of their lives, Pandora and Epimetheus would sit in their garden, aged and worn, but still together, watching the sun set over a world that was no longer golden, but had perhaps gained something in the exchange. The light would slant through the olive trees, turning the leaves silver green, and they would hold hands with fingers that had grown gnarled, but knew each other's shape perfectly. They would not speak of the jar, not anymore, but it was always there, a presence in their lives, like a scar that aches when the weather changes. Sometimes, young people would come to them, seeking wisdom, seeking to understand how the world had become what it was. Pandora would look at them with eyes that had seen the transition from paradise to struggle, and she would tell them, in a voice still musical despite the years, that every gift comes with a price, every blessing with a curse, every opening with a closing. But she would also tell them that in the moment of choosing to open what is closed, to seek what is hidden, to know what is unknown, humans become most fully themselves, for better and for worse. She would not tell them whether she regretted opening the jar. That was a question she could not answer, perhaps because the answer changed from day to day, perhaps because regret itself was one of the things that had escaped from the jar, making the question circular, unanswerable, eternal. Instead, she would speak of hope, that mysterious thing that might or might not remain in the jar, that might or might not exist in the world, that might be both and neither, all and nothing. Hope, she would say, is not the belief that everything will be well, for clearly everything is not always well. Hope is not the denial of suffering, for suffering is real and cannot be wished away. Hope is something smaller and larger, simpler and more complex. It is the tiny voice that whispers, "Try again," when all attempts have failed. It is the seed that remains viable through the longest winter. It is the child born into a difficult world who might, just might, make it better. It is the reason to take the next breath, the next step, to face the next day. Even when breathing is hard, stepping is painful, and the day promises only more of the same. As night would fall, gradual and gentle, the old couple would make their way inside, moving slowly but supporting each other. Two who had become one through shared years and shared sorrows. The jar would be there in its corner, a shadow among shadows, holding its secret, keeping its counsel. And perhaps, if one listened very carefully, if the night was still enough and the heart quiet enough, one might hear from within it a sound, like wings, like whispers, like the promise of dawn that lives in the darkest part of night. The world had been changed forever by Pandora's moment of curiosity. That is certain. The golden age had ended, never to return. That too is beyond dispute. But what had begun, what had replaced it, was not simply an age of suffering. It was an age of choice, of growth, of becoming. Mortals faced with their mortality discovered what it meant to be truly alive. Confronted with evil, they learned to recognize and choose good. Subjected to suffering, they developed compassion, knowing that all things end. They learned to cherish beginnings and middles, not just endings. The gods continued to watch from Olympus, intervening sometimes in human affairs. But something fundamental had shifted. Humans were no longer simply their playthings, their entertainment, their subjects. They had become something more complex, more interesting, more worthy of respect if not equality. They had eaten from the tree of knowledge, to borrow a metaphor from another tradition, and while this had expelled them from paradise, it had also started them on a journey toward something that might, in the fullness of time, transcend even paradise. And Pandora, first woman, all gifted, the one who opened what should have remained closed. She became memory and myth, story and symbol, blamed and blessed in equal measure. Every woman who came after her carried something of her nature, the curiosity that drives discovery, the courage to face the unknown, the strength to endure the consequences of choice. Every human, regardless of gender, inherited her legacy, the knowledge that some doors, once opened, can never be closed, that some knowledge, once gained, can never be unlearned, that some prices, once paid, can never be refunded. But they also inherited what she discovered in the aftermath of her action, that humans are capable of facing whatever emerges from whatever jars they open, that they can transform suffering into wisdom, pain into compassion, loss into love, that they can find meaning in meaninglessness, create order from chaos, build beauty from broken things, that they can hope, whether hope is locked in a jar or free in the world, whether it is a blessing or a curse, whether it is real or merely a story they tell themselves to make the darkness bearable. The jar still exists somewhere, in story, if not in fact. It sits in its corner, dark and patient, holding hope or having released it, waiting for someone else to wonder what might be inside, to reach for the lid, to choose knowledge over ignorance, whatever the cost. And perhaps that is as it should be, for without the possibility of opening what is closed, of seeking what is hidden, of risking disaster for the chance of discovery, humans would not be human. They would be something else, something safer perhaps, something happier possibly, but something less than what they have become through their struggles and sorrows. As our story draws toward its close, like day fading into evening, like consciousness drifting toward sleep, we might imagine Pandora in her final years, sitting alone now, for Epimetheus has gone ahead into that last mystery that awaits all mortals. She sits beside the jar, her hand resting on its cool surface, and perhaps she speaks to it, or to hope within it, or to the memory of the moment that changed everything. She might say that she understands now what the gods intended, or that she will never understand and has made peace with not knowing. She might express regret or defiance, sorrow or acceptance, or all of these things at once, for human hearts are large enough to hold contradictions. She might thank Zeus for making her the instrument of humanity's evolution, or curse him for the same reason, or both, or neither. But more likely she simply sits in silence, an old woman with a jar, two artifacts of a story that has been told and retold so many times that the truth has been worn smooth like a stone in a river, shaped by the telling until it fits perfectly in the hand of memory. The room grows darker as the sun sets, shadows spreading like spilled ink across the floor. But she does not light a lamp. She has learned to be comfortable with darkness, has learned that it is not the opposite of light, but its companion, each defining the other, each necessary for the full experience of existence. In the jar, hope stirs, or does not stir, exists or does not exist, waits or has already departed. It does not matter which is true, because hope's power lies not in its location, but in the human ability to imagine it, to believe in it, to act as if it exists even when all evidence suggests otherwise. This is perhaps the greatest gift that emerged from Pandora's jar. Not hope itself, but the capacity to hope, the uniquely human ability to project imagination into the future and find there reasons to continue. The stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky, each one a small light in vast darkness, each one alone yet part of constellations that tell stories, that guide travelers, that mark the passage of seasons and years. Pandora watches them through the window. These distant fires that burn without consuming, that shine without warming, that exist at distances and scales that human minds can calculate but not truly comprehend. They were there before the jar was opened, and they will be there long after the last human has forgotten the story of the first woman and her terrible necessary mistake. But for now, in this moment, suspended between day and night, between memory and forgetting, between myth and truth, the story continues. Every dawn that follows darkness, every spring that follows winter, every birth that follows death, every act of kindness in a cruel world, every moment of beauty in an ugly situation, every choice to love despite the certainty of loss. All of these are echoes of that first moment when Pandora chose to open what was closed, to release what was contained, to transform humanity from innocent to experienced, from ignorant to wise, from blessed to something more complex, more difficult, more real. The jar remains in story and symbol, in warning and promise. It reminds us that curiosity has consequences, that knowledge comes with price, that every advancement carries within it the seeds of new problems. But it also reminds us that humans are defined by their willingness to open jars, to ask questions that might have terrible answers, to seek truth even when truth might hurt, to choose knowledge over comfort, growth over safety, becoming over being, and hope. Hope remains too, wherever it might be, however it might exist. It lives in the mother singing to her sick child, believing against evidence that mourning will bring healing. It lives in the farmer planting seeds in drought-struck soil, trusting that rain will come. It lives in the artist creating beauty in a world that often seems to prefer ugliness, in the teacher sharing knowledge with students who might use it badly, in the lover opening their heart again after it has been broken, in every human act that says, despite everything, I choose to continue, to believe, to try. This is Pandora's true legacy, not the release of evils into the world, but the demonstration that humans can face those evils and not be destroyed, that they can take the worst that existence can offer and transform it into something bearable, sometimes even beautiful, that they can find in their own hearts, whether placed there by gods or arising from their own nature, the strength to endure, the wisdom to adapt, the courage to continue. As our tale winds down like a music box playing its last notes, like a candle flame flickering before it goes out, like eyes growing heavy with approaching sleep, we leave Pandora in her quiet room with her famous jar, two figures in a story that has become larger than both of them. The details may be lost to time. The truth may be irretrievable beneath layers of retelling, but the essence remains. Once, someone opened something that perhaps should have remained closed, and in doing so, changed everything forever. Whether this was tragedy or necessity, disaster or destiny, curse or gift, depends on who tells the story and who listens to it. But perhaps it is all of these things at once, held in perfect tension, like hope in a jar, like light and darkness defining each other, like mortality giving meaning to life. The story of Pandora is the story of every human who has ever chosen to know rather than to remain ignorant, to risk rather than to remain safe, to open rather than to leave closed. And now, as night fully claims, the sky and stars right there, ancient patterns across the darkness, as somewhere a jar sits with its lid firmly closed or slightly ajar, as hope exists or does not exist, is trapped or free, is blessing or curse, we too can rest. The story has been told once more, added to the countless tellings that came before and will come after, each one slightly different, each one essentially the same, each one an opening of the jar that releases its contents anew into the world of the listener's imagination. Sleep now, and perhaps dream of a world before jars were opened, when suffering was unknown and life was simple. Or dream of this world, complex and difficult, and beautiful in its complexity and difficulty. Dream of Pandora, young and curious, old and wise, forever poised at the moment of choice that defines what it means to be human. Dream of hope, whatever and wherever it might be. That strange gift that might be the greatest cruelty, or the essential mercy, the thing that makes bearable what would otherwise be unbearable. The olive trees whisper in the night breeze. There, silver leaves catching moonlight, like small mirrors reflecting infinity. Somewhere, a nightingale sings, its voice carrying across distances that can be measured in space but not in meaning. The world turns on its axis, carrying us all toward tomorrow, toward another day of facing what was released from the jar, of finding reasons to continue despite everything, of hoping whether hope is real or merely a story we tell ourselves. And in that turning, in that continuation, in that choice to face another day, Pandora's story lives on, not as history, but as present reality, not as something that happened once, but as something that happens every time someone chooses knowledge over ignorance, every time someone opens what is closed, every time someone says, I must know, even when knowing might bring pain. We are all Pandora, standing before our own jars, making our own choices, living with our own consequences, finding our own hope in the aftermath of our curiosity. The story ends as all stories must end, but also continues as all true stories continue in the lives of those who have heard it, in the choices they make, in the jars they open or leave closed, in the hope they nurture or neglect. Pandora sleeps now. If mythical figures ever sleep, her work long done, but never finished, her choice made but always being made, her jar opened but somehow still opening, still releasing its contents into a world that must always learn anew how to transform suffering into wisdom, curiosity into consciousness, mortality into meaning. Close your eyes now. Let the story settle into your bones, like sediment in still water, like seeds in dark soil, like hope in a jar that may or may not be open. Let sleep come like a gentle god, bringing dreams that might be memories of a golden age, or prophecies of ages yet to come. And know that when morning comes, as morning always comes, you will wake in a world shaped by Pandora's choice, difficult and beautiful, painful and precious, finite and therefore infinitely valuable. The jar waits, has always waited, will always wait, containing or having released its mysteries, and we, children of Pandora's legacy, carriers of her curiosity, inheritors of her consequences, we continue the story with every choice we make, every question we ask, every lid we lift, despite not knowing what lies beneath. This is our blessing and our curse, our gift and our burden, our tragedy and our triumph. This is what makes us human. And now, truly now, as the last echoes of the story fade, like footsteps walking away down a long corridor, like the last light of sunset surrendering to night, like the last note of a lullaby dissolving into silence, we release you into sleep, into dreams, into the place where all stories return to become new stories, where all endings become beginnings, where hope lives, whether it is in the jar, or in the world, or in the space between sleeping and waking, where all possibilities exist at once. Rest now, blessed by the knowledge that stories never truly end, that Pandora's choice echoes in every human choice, that hope exists wherever humans choose to find it, create it, nurture it, share it. The world turns, the stars wheel overhead. The jar sits in its corner, and somewhere, always, someone is reaching for a lid, driven by the curiosity that makes us human, the hope that makes us endure, the love that makes it all worthwhile despite everything, because of everything, in the face of everything. Sleep comes on soft wings, carrying you away from the world of jars and choices, sorrows and hopes, into the realm where Morpheus, god of dreams, shapes visions from the substance of sleep itself. Perhaps you will dream of Pandora, forever young, forever old, forever at the moment of choosing. Perhaps you will dream of hope, golden and patient, waiting for its moment. Perhaps you will dream of nothing at all, and in that nothing find the rest that makes tomorrow possible. The story is told, the night is deep, the stars keep their eternal watch. Somewhere a jar sits with its secrets. Somewhere hope exists or does not exist. Somewhere someone is making a choice that will echo through time. But here, now, there is only quiet, only peace, only the gentle descent into sleep, where all stories merge into one story, the story of existence itself, beautiful and terrible, ending and endless, closed and open, like a jar that contains everything and nothing, like hope that is both prison and promise, like sleep that is both ending and beginning. And so we leave you, wrapped in the ancient tale, like a blanket woven from moonlight and memory, myth and meaning. The story of Pandora's jar has been opened once more, its contents released into your imagination, its hope planted in your heart. What grows from it, what emerges, what transforms, that is your story now, your choice, your jar to open or leave, closed. But for now, for this blessed now, there is only rest, only peace, only the soft darkness that holds all possibilities, all dreams, all hopes, whether they are in jars or in hearts, or in the spaces between the stars where gods and mortals meet in stories that never end. Good night, dear listener, carrier of stories, heir to Pandora's legacy. May your dreams be gentle, your sleep be deep, and your awakening be to a world where hope, wherever it dwells, gives you strength to face whatever emerges from whatever jars await your curious hands. The story ends. The story continues. The story transforms into dream and dream into story, endless as the cycle of night and day, certain as the curiosity that makes us human, eternal as hope itself, whatever and wherever it may be.